Well, welcome everyone. Thank you for joining us for our artist lecture series. My name is Krista Muller and I'm the director of Peters Valley School of Craft in Layton, New Jersey. Our artist lecture program is generously funded through the Richard L. Snyder Fund and the Greater Pike County Community Foundation. And the Greater Pike County Community Foundation is just across the Delaware River, about 15 minutes from Peters Valley. And we have a partnership with the Pike County Library to fund artist lectures. And this year, due to COVID, we found this whole new way to share our artists with the rest of the country and even the world. And we're just so excited to have you all here. A couple of things, housekeeping, we have about an hour-long lecture, give or take, when Geoffrey's going to show us his studio today and give a talk. And if for those of you that aren't familiar with Zoom, if you scroll down to the bottom of the page, you have this little area that says Q&A, and that's where you can place your questions. And if you have questions for Geoffrey, please type them in, and at the end of his presentation, we will open it up for questions. Okay. And I just want to welcome Geoffrey Gorman from Santa Fe, New Mexico. We're so excited to have you here and hoping to have you here in person next year, but we will have you here virtually in October teaching the class and here tonight. Just want to let everybody know a little bit about Geoffrey. He's been creating original found material sculptures in Santa Fe, New Mexico for more than 15 years. He shows his work around the United States and has also exhibited in China and South Korea. Over the last several years, he's been written about in the New York Post, Southwest Art, American Craft Magazine, American Style, and Cloth, Paper, Scissors. His work is in numerous public and private collections around the United States. Growing up on an old plantation in the country, he refers to a Huck Finn-like environment, old quarries, woods filled with animals, dilapidated barns, and fallen houses. Geoffrey was surrounded by a wide variety of animal and human characters. And he once said, "I believe animals are just like humans," or should I say, maybe humans are just like animals, but we've kind of elevated ourselves and made ourselves feel more important. I'm using the animals as a metaphor of the human condition. So Geoffrey, take it away and take us through your process. Welcome.
Well, thanks, Kristen, and I'm sorry that I can't be there in person. Peters Valley is an institution that I've really wanted to teach at. I've only been teaching for about 3 years, doing these workshops around the country. But next year we'll definitely get to meet in person. So thanks so much for this talk tonight, for giving me a chance to speak. And what I want to do tonight, a little bit different than previous presentations, is I want to give you guys kind of more of a hands-on virtual tour of my studio and of my work. And I want to talk to you about what my motivations and what my inspirations are that keep me going, especially in times like these that we all know can feel a bit isolating. Also, some of you may know that I have a YouTube channel where I have about 12 YouTube videos that are exactly about motivation and inspiration. So here we go. I'm going to try to be pretty steady with the camera here because we know that it can be a bit of a challenge. So really what I wanted to introduce you to is the fact that what I work with is lost and found material. I'm taking you to my little back alley here, and this is where I keep a lot of my material. And I'm a pretty instantaneous artist in the sense that I don't plan ahead a lot. I build pieces basically based on what's inspiring me at the moment, and often the material is what's inspiring me. So even though some people are horrified by what my back little alleyway looks like, it's the only way I can really keep track of a lot of the material that I've collected. You can also see in the background my studio. It's a pretty small space, and I kind of treat it like a ship in a way because it's such a tight space. So I'm coming into my living room now, here's my little cat Lainey that doesn't know she's on video. So you guys, I'm going to talk to you about four kind of points in keeping me motivated and inspired. And at the end, there's going to be a quiz. I'm going to ask you if you remember them all. So one of the probably pretty big inspiration for me is travel. I grew up traveling. I was actually born in Europe. My parents were travelers. So it's really in my blood. And when I've traveled, been fortunate enough to travel over the years, over these last 15 years, it's really become an inspiration for me. And I'm going to show you two examples of that. This right here is a camel head. It's a portrait of a camel. And I was in Egypt a couple of years ago, and we went on a 3-day camel trek into, it was actually in Jordan with the Bedouin, into the desert. And it was very funny. I've ridden horses a little bit, and I was on this camel, and there were these kids that were kind of teaching us how to do it. And I started goofing around on the camel, and I kind of did some moves that I'd learned on horses. And then that night when we got to camp, these three kids came over to me, and they said, "We've never seen anybody that could ride a camel the way you can ride a camel. Would you be a camel jockey?" And I was really kind of honored, and I adore camels. I mean, I feel like I really developed a connection with camels when I was over there. And the interesting thing about the camels that I saw over there is I often have tribal kind of scarification, tribal identification on my work. The camels over there, what they would do is, and for those of you that have been over in that area, they'll carve in patterns and designs and things right in the on the camels. It doesn't hurt them or anything. So it becomes this really decorative surface, which for me is perfect. So anyways, here's one piece really inspired by my travels. The other piece that I wanted to talk to you guys about is this river otter. And this river otter was inspired by my going to Alaska, where I have two brothers that lived up there. And one day we went out on this island to look for grizzly bears, and we were on this bridge. It was a beautiful day. We were in this valley, and there was a grizzly bear probably a half mile off. But under the bridge, there were these river otters that were just playing and sliding and going, and I'd never seen them before. I'd never seen them so close. And it was, you can see for me, animal experiences and animal interactions are pretty profound for me. So I came back and I did this series of river otters based on my travels. So reading and travel are one inspiration for me. I'm walking over my living room. The next inspiration, you all, and I'm sure some of you that work with found material, it's often this pull between the material you're working with, the anecdotes that you're gonna illustrate, and the pieces that you want to do. And so I realized that material can really affect what I'm doing. And I'm going to show you a couple of pieces here. This is a bat here. And so I kind of keep everything from my studio, literally everything. So I've kept all my old aprons, my own old work aprons. And I had a cotton work apron, and it was pretty worn. And I started looking at it, and I realized that the apron, in a way, was a map. It was a map of what I'd done. You know, there were cuts from carving wood, and there were stains from glue, and over the years, it had really developed this patina. And again, it looked like this mat. And then I started thinking about what creatures maybe have maps on them. And I started thinking about the wings of bats. And I was thinking bats are such travelers that if we were to map out where they went, we would have this amazing map of places. So here's the old work apron that I've applied a few things to, kind of as this map for this bat, and I love this kind of almost transcendent feeling of going beyond what the surface is, because you all know that when I use found material, it's about transformation. It's about transforming one material into something else. And I'll give you another example. Let's say I found some old electrical wire at Habitat for Humanity, and it had this beautiful ivory feel to it. So I was looking through a book and I found this anteater that had this beautiful feathery tail. So that's why I built this piece, because of coming across that electrical wire. But what I'm doing is I'm taking these very common materials, like a bike tire. You can see that his shell is basically a bike tire, but I'm turning it into something else. I'm transforming it. And I'm really hoping that the viewer doesn't know what the material is to begin with. And I think it's a lot like our lives. I think we're constantly transforming as human beings. I think we fight it, and I think sometimes we're taught that change is bad. But I think our minds are so active, and we're, especially us creative types, we're working with so many ideas. And I find that I'm changed from day to day. I find that I'm changed from year to year. It's funny, in the calendar dates since we've been in this lockdown, I was thinking about what I was thinking 6 months ago. And I was in a very, very different place than where I am now. And I realized it's like my material. I've transformed. So what I'm wanting to do with the material is I'm going to want to start with one thing, but I'm going to want you to believe that it's something else. So that is material that has been an inspiration for me. And it's fun. I get a lot of people send me material, or will drop material off on my front stoop, on my front porch out here. And it's really challenging for me to figure out how to, I don't use plastics per se, and I don't use any animal parts. So I've got a particular idea of what I want to use, but if it's rough and it's metal and it's something that I can rust and transform, somehow I'll incorporate that into what I'm doing. So, so the next thing I wanted to talk to you guys about, an inspiration and motivation, and also to keep I don't know about you all, sometimes to keep the curiosity of creating can be pretty difficult. There are days where you wake up and maybe you don't have that passion and that drive that you've had. I mean, certainly we ebb and we flow. I've been creating this work now for 15 years. And I know that my energy from 15 years ago is very different from what it is now. I think in some ways through the years, what I've ended up doing is actually focusing more in on what I'm doing more specifically, and kind of taking my day-to-day activities, I'm finding are maybe a little more profound. We've obviously all slowed down and gotten a chance to really look at the minuscule and the mundane. One of the videos I did on my YouTube channel was my visits to an ant pile. I have a pretty darn big ant pile in my backyard. And these ants suddenly became an inspiration for me, because every time I looked out there, man, these guys, once the sun's up, they are working away. So it was this funny kind of observation that I don't know in 6 months or a year ago that I would have even paid any attention to that. Now, what I call all of that is, I call it kind of artistic journaling. I think what I'm doing is, I think of a journalist as somebody that is noting their lives on maybe a daily basis. They're jotting it down. Obviously, if you're reading it, it's in a book. And I think of somebody like Annie Dillard. I just read Pilgrim at Tinker Creek, which was quite a fascinating study of her natural world. And I realized that I'm doing the same thing in my journaling. And recently what happened to me, I was up in Taos and I was going to go hiking up there. And I was driving on this back road and there was this magpie that kept flying from kind of fence post across the road to other fence posts to other fence posts. And it was like he almost kind of had this dialogue with me that for some reason, I don't know if he was curious about me. He kept up with me, and it made me think about bird lines. It made me think about bird paths. It made me think about how when I do a lot of hiking in the woods a lot, you come across myriad paths in the woods if you're observing. And they're often heading off in directions that really don't make sense to us. It's not like it's at the top of a mountain. And I realized that he was kind of taking me on this artistic path. So anyways, I built this piece based on this magpie. You can see now what he's done is, I love, one movement that I grew up with was the Marcel Duchamp, the whole Dada movement, the kind of, you're throwing these elements that seemingly have no relationship with each other together, and you're almost forcing a dialogue between them, sometimes in a very startling way. And I'm not trying to do that, but I found this child's chair at an antique store, and I realized that it was very evocative to me, and it was, and then I started thinking about it, and I realized as Kristen introduced me, where I grew up outside of Baltimore on this old horse farm, we would literally go into the woods for miles and miles and sometimes days. And sometimes, I don't know why, we would come upon small houses. And I remember one house where the whole front wall had collapsed off of it. It was 2-story. It was like a dollhouse. It was only 1 room thick. But there was a kitchen, there was a living room, there was a bedroom, and there was a bathroom. And the wall had fallen off on it. All these vines had grown all over it, but there was furniture in it. And I realized that this little chair here really reminded me of seeing these funny structures when I was growing up, these kind of frozen in time. And it's funny now, that's quite a while ago. I went back several years ago, and a lot of these old structures that I had explored as a kid were gone. The other thing I realized also in these animal lines is, if you all know my work at all, what I do is I'm often taking foam, I'm carving a shape out of it, then I'm covering the foam in canvas, then I'm wrapping the canvas with wire, and I'm rusting it. And then if you look at, so my point being here, you can see the rusted wire here. And then I realized when I started doing this, that these also were kind of animal tracks. They were animal lines. They were also star lines. And again, I was creating this map out of what seemingly, when I started doing this, it was purely a technical process to wrap the wire, because I've been very influenced by Egyptian culture and mummies and things like that. But I realized in transforming my material that it could take on other layers than, necessarily what I had started right away. So going back to the journaling and talking about the birds. So recently, if any of you follow me on Facebook, I've done a whole series of songbirds of New Mexico. And I laughingly said to somebody, I guess I'll never get famous doing small songbirds of New Mexico. And she said, you never know. You never know what might happen. But I know now I've been spending a lot of time outside. I've been spending a lot of time observing birds. And these interactions are obviously pretty important to me. So that's journaling. So we're going to move on to, in talking about, now this is inspirations and motivations. let's see here. What I'm trying to show you is this wall of wings. So the next thing I wanted to talk to you about inspirations was doing specific series or bodies of work. And I've obviously done this series of wings that I wanted to show you. The fun thing I found when I kind of drill in doing a really specific body of work, it's like I become an expert on that particular field. Now, how I got inspired by doing these, about 5 years ago, it was a winter day. I was working in my studio, it was snowing, and I have 2 big windows in my studio. And as I was watching, this bird came right towards me, and it flew into my window, and it kind of crashed into the window, and I realized, I think it was a Cooper's hawk. And I was really startled, and then it flew away, and I got a couple, and then I came back in, and what had happened was the dust on the wings left an impression on my window of the feathers. So there was this beautiful kind of very ephemeral dusting of these wings. Now the bird was fine, he flew off. I think the next day he got a pigeon. It was not as pretty as the day before, and I watched him eat the pigeon. But I saw this almost kind of angelic image on my screen of my glass, and that's when I started thinking about, wouldn't it be fun, instead of doing a whole bird, just to articulate the wings? And so what I've done here is I'm going to talk to you guys a little bit about a couple of these different wings. So in a way, to me, when you work on a series, it's like you're kind of conjugating a verb, or you're saying I am, you are, they are. You're really fleshing it out when you're doing it over and over again. This piece right here is sandhill crane wings. We have a big flyover bosque dilapidated down in southern New Mexico, where the sandhill cranes come in, and there may be, thousands and thousands. I'm going to say 40,000. I don't know if that's right. Thousands of them that stop by. And I go down there. I spend quite a bit of time hanging out with them. I find them to be very interesting birds. They do not have a pretty call, and they're very awkward when they move. But there's something both prehistoric and magical about watching them. So this next pair here is some albatross wings. I used to go to Hawaii quite a bit, and the island I went to, Kauai, there's a lighthouse called the Kilauea Lighthouse. And the amazing thing about the Kilauea Lighthouse is when you go out on this point of land, it's up quite high. I'm guessing it's up 100, I don't know, it's high up. You go through, they have these local Hawaiian geese, which I love. They're called nene, and they're kind of aggressive. You kind of get through the geese, and then there are these albatrosses, and they're all flying over this lighthouse on this point of land. But the lighthouse is so high up, they're about 10 feet above you. And the thing that astounded me about albatrosses is their size. Their size is shockingly huge, and they've got these. When I started laying out the plans for this to give a rough idea, I was shocked by how wide the wingspan is to the length of the body. In other words, the body's pretty small. These wings are astounding. So here I am at the Kilauea Lighthouse, and there are these albatrosses, and there are these terns, and they're all swooping right around you. I mean, you couldn't ask for a better viewpoint. Interesting thing with albatrosses is they sometimes can almost spend their whole life in the air. So what they do, which is a bit gruesome, is they will attack other birds and make the birds regurgitate in midair to get their food, because they don't want to stop to have to fish, because it's so much work to get going. So I kind of have an affinity for albatrosses, and in fact, I recently did a small skull of an albatross out of lead. I work with a variety of materials, you can tell. I really try not to limit myself by saying I work with one thing. I work with canvas, I work with wood, I'll work with lead occasionally. Lead's a very tricky medium to work with. I only have that one piece of lead to show you guys right now. I work with paint. You can see this piece here. This is based on, I think, robin's wings. But what I ended up doing was I obviously didn't fill in all the feathers. And so to me, I call it a Thunderbird wings. It has almost this apparel kind of feel to it, like it's maybe some sort of a robe. Down here, I don't know if you guys can see, I just recently made a pair of raven wings. And then again, you know, we're talking about series as inspiration. Who else has wings? Well, insects have wings. So I built these cicada wings. And I can remember in growing up outside of Baltimore, the cicadas in the summer, those 17-year locusts, would be so loud that you would go outside and you couldn't hear anybody speak. And then the other thing that when I was a kid kind of creeped me out is on all the locust trees, there would be the husk of them. There would be this kind of strange creature that clung to the bark, but it was just the shell. It was the feet and the back, but it had split open where the cicada had come out of it. And they were on all these trees. And when I was a little kid, it was kind of spooky. It kind of freaked me out when I was a kid. But anyways, I thought about cicada wings. Funny thing, recently I bought something at a Chinese store, and it was some sort of special medicinal soup, and in it it had these cicada husks in there, these locust bodies. Also, another series of work, if you know my work, you realize that I have worked in a lot of different series. When I went to Egypt a couple of years ago, I was fortunate enough to go to the Egyptian Museum, and it was in total disarray. When I was there, I went 2 days because it was such an amazing experience. I was going back into this museum, and I was going back into the back rooms of the museum, and I was opening drawers and I was looking at artifacts, and nobody was around. There weren't guards, there weren't curators, there weren't, it was quite amazing. Egyptian art is probably a very, very big influence on my work, both technically the way I came up with the idea of wrapping the canvas and then wiring it was based on mummies. So I spent 2 days at the Egyptian Museum, and I knew that it was going to affect my work, but I didn't want it to be necessarily really blatant, that you would look at my work and say, it's Egyptian art. So what I did was I've done a whole series, and I'm guessing I've maybe done 20 pieces in the series. I've done basically my animals that I build, but I've done them standing as a human. Now we know this is a coyote. I don't know how well you can see it, but we know that in Egyptian art, it was human beings that were wearing masks, and they were mimicking animals who were their gods. And some of them were very, very intense. Some of these, the jackal, and but some of them were amazingly, to me, almost cartoon-like, and they'd mummify anything from hippopotamus to cats to anything could get mummified. So spending a lot of time with them, this is how I interpreted the effect of seeing all that amazing sculpture that I saw, both from the sizes of a 2 to 4 story building down to little tiny, tiny scarab beetles that uh, they would mummify, and they would use to send off with the dead. Basically, these were put in the coffins or in the burial chambers. I'm going to show you another pair of wings here. This one's quite colorful. And it's a bit more fanciful. It's a bit more of a, I can't say they're anything specific. It was funny in doing this wing series for me, it's almost like being a painter. I have a large flat surface that I can work with, and so I can draw on it, I can paint on it, whatever I want to do. I work with several art consultants around the United States, and you guys know that art consultants place art in both public and private places. So I'm working with an art consultant that is placing artwork in the Salt Lake City has a new airport that's going to be open, I think, in a week or so. So she asked me, I had done a very small scale pair of owl wings, and they were life size. They were maybe this size, and they kind of went down like this. Very expressive. She said, could you do them 8 feet by 9 feet? So I love a challenge. So I kind of blew up the cartoon, and I made the piece. And the very funny thing, I won't spend a lot of time on it. The very funny thing is the day I started them was the day that George Floyd died. And I was working outside on this huge, massive piece of these wings. And so for the 2.5 weeks that I was building these wings, we were all going through this, this tumultuous time based on this person that had gotten trapped in circumstance. And I kept thinking about these wings, and I kept thinking about him, and I kept thinking, how could I have gotten them to him? Or, you know, you just kind of have these crazy thoughts. But it was a very funny time. And then the other day, I got the wings professionally photographed at a photographer came into the Salt Lake City. It's at the Delta Lounge. He took a picture of them, and he said, oh, I have a funny anecdote to tell you. All the workers love your piece the most. And I'm going to try to reproduce this a little bit here now. And I said, why? And he said, well, they get about 10 feet in front of it, and it looks like they're flying. And I hadn't built the piece so that people could, you know, walk in front of it and pretend they had wings. But it was certainly an interesting process through that. So the other thing I wanted to talk to, and I'm kind of coming to the end here. So what I'm talking about is I'm talking about motivation. I'm talking obviously about artist, the storyteller, right? I've spent this whole time talking to you guys about stories. And stories to me, I mean, every piece that you go around in my house, and let me just, there's a story. You saw,
Geoffrey?
Yeah.
We did have a request if you could please show the last set of wings again. I'm sorry to interrupt.
Oh, okay. The
colorful
ones.
Yes.
Okay, let me step back here. Thank you for letting me know. How's that look? Can you see them? And I'm going to come in closer just so you can see that I got a bit carried away with the palette. And you can tell that I love 1950s Celadon and these 1950s colors I somehow gravitate to. Now another series that I did was I did a white series based on, I held up this dog before. I've done a series of white pieces. You saw also earlier you saw the river otter was white. When about 10 years ago, I ended up in the hospital and I was pretty sick and I was pretty incapacitated. And one night in my hospital room, it was about 5 o'clock, all these white animals came into my room and got up on my bed, including a big, huge moose that laid his whole head down on my body, his antlers and everything. So I've done this whole series of white pieces based on that experience. And for me, the thing that's really fun about them is you can see in looking at a piece like this, it's kind of stripping it down to the basic element. It's stripping it down also to the silhouette of the animal. And I believe that when animals in the wild are often dealing with a silhouette, they don't necessarily have time to let's say they come into a clearing and there's maybe a family of coyotes, there's a mom, a dad, and a small coyote. When they come into a clearing, they're going to scan the whole clearing. And if there's anything that catches their eye, it's the silhouette that's going to tell them a lot about whether this creature is dangerous or whether it's friendly or whether maybe it's a family member. So in my white pieces and in a lot of my pieces, I'm often working on the silhouette, trying to maybe convince you that this is a real piece. Just a little aside, I was very complimented a couple of years ago. A dog came, I was having a show at a gallery. A dog came in and I had this dog sculpture on the ground. He came in and he sniffed the dog's butt. And that was like, oh my God, if I fooled that dog, I could probably fool humans. The other thing I wanted to talk to you guys about, inspiration, motivation, having a real curiosity, both for the materials I'm using, for the subject matters, for the events in my life. The other thing that I realized is really important to me is commissions, is I get quite a few commissions. Like and I'm sorry I don't have a visual of the 8 by 9 foot owl wings that I built for the airport. And, you know, I started thinking about those wings and I thought, wow, this would be really cool to build them, say, 30 feet by 40 feet by 15 feet high. And let's say they were in a playground and you could climb up on them and there would maybe be a room inside for kids. There would maybe be this ladder down and there would be this kids really, you know, this fort or something like that. So the thing that, what commissions do for me is they really stretch me, because people will ask me to do things that I wouldn't normally do. Now, 99% of the time I accept commissions because I really like that challenge. I'm going to show you right now. I'm building in my studio a commission for a landing owl. And so we're kind of ending back where we started here. I just want to make sure. So you can see the owl here. You can see his tail feathers. Now what I do is I work with visuals. I work with imagery when I create a piece, and I go from there. So I've done quite a few commissions, and I've been lucky to do. I recently was commissioned to do 8 New Mexico animal heads for a new hotel in Taos, New Mexico. And the designer that I worked with knows my work, and she was nice enough to let me both be fanciful and be pretty realistic about what I chose to use. So it was a situation where I may not have built them except being commissioned to do it. So that's another thing. So you all, I'm kind of, I didn't want to go on and on about all of this. So I talked to you about this. This is where the test comes in. I talked to you, one, about travel, right? And reading, how that's an inspiration for me. Number 2, I talked to you guys about material, how material can take me in a separate direction. And sometimes the material is very serendipitous. In other words, I haven't picked it out. Maybe somebody has dropped something off on my front door and people send me stuff. And that's a way. Another way is journaling. I talked to you guys about journaling. I talked to you about another little anecdote. Recently, I was driving somewhere, and right next to me, and you can see I've got a good imagination here, there was a family of coyotes. I'm saying it was a mom and dad, a little one. There were 3 coyotes, 2 were big, 1 was smaller. They were running in an arroyo next to me, and I slowed my car down probably to, I don't know, let's say 5 miles an hour. And as I was driving, I looked over at them and they looked over at me, and they had this really penetrating look in their eye. It was very intense. And I came back and I built a lot of coyotes. I also built a lot of generic dogs, but coyotes are a big thing. I built a lot of rabbits because I see a lot of rabbits in my hikes. And the rabbits in New Mexico can be big and they can be aggressive, and sometimes they'll chase you. No, that's a joke. But I like rabbits too. I think of rabbits as tricksters. So that's journaling. And then the other thing I talked to you about for inspirations was to do series, was to really focus in on a specific body of work. Another series I did a series, and I don't have visuals right now, they're on my website. Daumier was a cartoonist and painter in the mid 1800s. I think he lived from 1807 to 1879 in Paris. He did caricatures of the politicians, and he was very controversial, and he got into a lot of trouble, but they were cartoons. So I built this series of about 15 pieces. I had two toucans talking, I had two rabbits talking, I had two coyotes talking. They were based on Daumier's, on his cartoon series. Peters Valley yesterday or today on Instagram, they posted a picture of me next to a figure, and which is pretty unusual. I don't do a lot of figures. I've started doing a series based on the Brothers Grimm. And so what I'm doing is I'm reading some of their stories and I'm illustrating them with specific characters. Now, the funny thing about the Brothers Grimm is most people don't delve in deeply to their early work. Their early work was very, very dark. Through the years, they kind of softened their stories and the stories. Rapunzel was pregnant. What a big surprise, and there was this whole kind of element to it that in later stories got kind of washed out. But I like that edginess of these early stories, these folk stories. So I've done a couple of figures based on the Brothers Grimm, some of their stories. And I think the thing that's fun for me is I both get to articulate what I'm doing literally, but I also get to research what I'm doing it on. In other words, I got to really read about the Brothers Grimm, and I got to really read about what they were doing. And again, to me, what they were doing is they were telling you life tales, and they were almost metaphors. And my work is a metaphor, as Kristen talked to you about in the beginning. I think animals are a metaphor for human beings. And you can see how animals, to me, are very spiritual, very sacred, very special, very unique. I seem to have an ability to see them. The other day, my granddaughter was here and we were walking in an arroyo, and I said, gosh, it would be fun to see a bobcat. So about 5 minutes later, a bobcat jumped out of and it's the first time I've ever seen a bobcat in New Mexico. Sometimes it appears and sometimes it doesn't. But so anyways, that's artist to storyteller, where I get my inspirations, what my motivations are. And it really helps me. I'm a full-time artist. Between teaching and sculpting and traveling, which used to take a lot of my time. I used to try to take at least a month or two off a year to travel. It's all keeping me pretty busy. So thanks you all for listening, and hopefully there's some questions.
Yes, actually, thank you, Geoffrey. One question I got was, what is your website?
My website's a tough one. It's called geoffreygorman.com.
I also just put it in the chat.
Oh, you did? Okay.
My YouTube site is a little bit more difficult to find, and because I don't have a URL per se on my YouTube. I think quite literally, if you Google Geoffrey Gorman on YouTube, there are 12 videos on it. So, and the best way to see a lot of my imagery is basically to Google my name. In the 15 years I've been doing this, I probably produce between 50 and 75 pieces a year. and a lot of them seem to be on Google. It's the darndest thing. So if you want to see a lot of imagery, I'd say Google my name.
Well, that's great. Thank you. We have a question from Jennifer Place. What tools do you use most often? And do you weld or rivet?
Yeah, and in fact, I didn't show you guys. I skipped over it. I do weld. I learned how to do it recently, and I have a little baby welder that I bought from Harbor Freight. It's about the size of a car battery, and it was quite amazing. It cost $200. What came with it was a coat, a mask, gloves, a pair of pliers. I did take a rough and ready welding course, but with these little baby welders, and let me just see if I have anything quickly that I've welded. I don't. So I'm welding things like armatures. I'm welding legs. If you want me to, I can show you a welded piece. I'm scared to, bounce all around. I do a little bit of welding. Hey, fire is like as good as it gets as far as, and I literally just set up the welder in my studio right here on this counter. Now, the basic tools, I was a furniture maker for 10 years in my early 20s. So I do know about woodworking tools, but basically my main tools are a small bandsaw, which I think you can see behind me here. Small bandsaw, I have a stationary sander outside, and then I have a bunch of hand tools. And it's kind of like the guy selling his book. On page 20, if you take my workshop, a lot of it is about the way I use tools. I think I use them in a somewhat unique way and a somewhat practical, fast way. So those are, and then drills, I have 2 drills. So I'm pretty low tech all in all.
That's great. Well, thank you. Another question from an anonymous attendee says, did you ever do drawings? We have a reclining woman.
Yeah, and in fact, I'm reaching for one right now. So I do drawings of my completed sculptures. And
oh, nice.
Okay, so it's a pen and ink drawing on a piece of unvarnished plywood, and the piece that I based it on is one of the first pieces I ever built, which is this wooden figure, which I called lignin. And lignin, I don't know if anybody knows what lignin is. Lignin is the chemical process in a tree that keeps it strong. So I do drawing. I also do prints. I just finished a digital print that I need to talk to my gallery about I try to make my work affordable. I try to make it as affordable as I can. And sometimes doing prints and drawings is a way to get people work without. My prices have gotten up there being with some of these galleries, which can make it tough. But yeah, I do prints. I also do bronzes. I do small bronzes. I try to, I'm trying to juggle a lot of, I don't want to be known as the guy that did the coyotes. I want to be known as the guy that did all this narrative about this animal world that I inhabit.
That's great. Thank you. What materials did you use in making the bird wings? From Diane Byrne.
I'll tell you, it's pretty high tech what I use. They're called 2x4s. So if you, right in the beginning when I showed you my back little alleyway, you saw a bunch of wood kind of leaning up there. It's old 2x4s. It's old barn wood. I'm building the tail feathers for this owl. So what these are is they're basically 1x6s. They're barn wood siding that I have, old 1x stock 3/4 inch, and I've sawn it in half is what I've done. So all of those birds' wings are reclaimed wood that I've had, and I maybe bandsaw it down to 1/4 inch, something like that. Just about everything I use is recycled, and it's the reason I do it is because it's fun, it's low cost, obviously. It challenges me to use this material in an evocative manner. I mean, 7 years ago when a bike store moved into my neighborhood, I was dumpster diving, and I realized that bike tires were really, really evocative. And now there's almost a bike tire in every single piece that I make. So, so it's somewhat serendipitous, the materials. And I use a lot of inner tubes too.
Oh, that's great. One other question we have from Samuel Hoyle is, might your wing series ever include butterfly wings?
Well, that's a good question. And it's funny, you know, my daughter in Chicago during this time, my 36-year-old daughter, who has a 3-year-old granddaughter, has this summer milkweeds, and she's collected all of the caterpillars off of and she raised about 40 of these butterflies. And I was in Chicago about 3 weeks ago, seeing the last of these butterflies hatching. You talk about a metamorphosis. Oh my gosh, from the caterpillar, which you realize has the same colors as the eventual wings. The problem with something like that for me is they're so recognizable. And sometimes my work can become a bit of a caricature, and I don't want to disrespect my models. I don't want my animals to be cutesy, because that's not what I think of my animals in the wild as. I think of them as it's survival. And so I've been scared to do something like butterfly wings because they're so recognizable. So nothing yet.
That's
But good
great.
question.
Well, I think that's the last question. But to everyone who's come here tonight to learn about Geoffrey's work, you can find him on geoffreygorman.com and on YouTube. And we do have, I think, 1 or 2 spaces left. And people are saying thank you so much. What a wonderful teacher you are. Go ahead.
Yeah, it's been a pleasure. And again, I can't wait to meet you guys in person next year at Peters Valley.
We're
And
hoping to meet you too.
if anybody has questions after this, please feel free to email me. Or call me. I'm very accessible.
Well, thank you very much. And thank you all for tuning in. And I just loved it. So much fun and so inspiring. Thank you very much. Have a wonderful evening. Oh, one more question. Hold on.
Yeah.
Thank you for the insight into your work. Looking forward to seeing you again, from James Shulkin.
Great, James. Thank you. Yeah, we shall meet again.
Thank you very much, everyone. Bye-bye.